Today I'm with Alicia Kinsman, staff attorney at International Institute of Connecticut. Today we're going to talk about immigrants, refugees, and human trafficking. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm going to go right into our first question. So many illegal immigrants that are victims of crime or witness of crime are afraid to come forward because of fear of deportation. And this is also true for visa-dependent immigrants who are victims of domestic violence. What kind of immigration relief is available in the United States?
The U.S. government has created a couple different kinds of relief for victims of the crimes that you've mentioned. They've created some specific visas. One is the U visa, the T visa, and relief under VAWA. And these are all for victims of crimes who have suffered greatly either emotionally and or physically.
Okay, and so is it true that in order to qualify for those specific types of visas, the victim has to work with law enforcement? For an example would be turn in your abuser or your trafficker. And really, what if someone is too afraid that it's just not possible to work with the law enforcement?
So Congress created these visas specifically to address concerns of immigrants of coming forward, reporting crimes when they have problems with their immigration status. They created it to help law enforcement with the investigation and prosecution of these crimes, including domestic violence, human trafficking, sexual assault, because having victims feel comfortable with coming forward allows law enforcement to better be able to investigate and prosecute. There are, specifically for the U visa, there are 4 specific elements that are required. The individual has to have suffered substantial physical or mental abuse as a result of being a victim of a qualifying criminal activity. The individual must have information concerning that criminal activity, and that individual must be helpful, has been helpful, is being helpful, or is likely to be helpful in the investigation or prosecution of the crime. And the criminal activity must have violated laws here in the United States. So as you can see with the U visa, some level of cooperation with law enforcement is required. With a T visa and relief under VAWA, that isn't always the case, or not necessarily to that extent.
Okay. And when you said severe or substantial emotional or psychological trauma that inhibits somebody to assist, can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. Okay. So for a T visa, which is for a victim of a severe form of human trafficking, in order to qualify for the T visa, the crime has to be reported to some kind of law enforcement agency, be that a federal law enforcement agency or a local law enforcement agency. It has to be reported to qualify for a T visa. However, for certain individuals, ongoing assistance to law enforcement isn't necessarily required if A, the victim is a minor, or B, the victim has suffered severely and assisting in the prosecution is going to be unreasonable in light of the circumstances, in light of the trauma that they've faced. So only reasonable cooperation with law enforcement is required.
Okay.
And with VAWA, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but with VAWA, relief under VAWA, there's not necessarily a level of law enforcement cooperation that's needed at all. In order to qualify for VAWA relief, the qualifying crime has to have taken place, and so usually cooperation to some extent with police can help prove that because you have a police report, but it's not necessary. Ongoing collaboration isn't necessary.
Okay, because I have a few people who have asked me if they turned in their abuser or trafficker, would they have to sit in the same room with them and basically give their report while it's documented by an attorney or an officer? or would they be able to talk to an attorney or an officer privately, not in front of the abuser or trafficker?
Based on my experience, typically what we see is the latter scenario,
Okay.
that there is a private interview between, of course, with the attorney, with the victim's attorney, but when law enforcement is brought in, based on my experience working with victims, it's been an interview between the victim and the law enforcement agent.
Okay.
I don't see any scenario where the aggressor, the victimizer, would be in the same room
Okay.
during an interview, something like that.
Good. Okay, so many people turn to their religious leaders for assistance instead of reporting the crime or seeking assistance from law enforcement and or agencies like ours. And this results in religious leaders handing out their own punishment and victim services. Is this an equivalent alternative for the victims?
I don't think so. It's not an equivalent alternative. There is a really great opportunity for religious leaders in scenarios like this to be of great assistance to victims, to be a victim advocate, or to help that victim reach the resources that are available to him or her by contacting an agency like the one I work for, the International Institute of Connecticut, or a similar agency wherever that victim is. And through reaching out to a victim service agency, they can benefit themselves. But it's also important that if the victim has legal immigration concerns, or if it's a serious crime, that there's something else is being done, that it's being reported to a higher level.
Okay, but you are absolutely willing to work with whoever the advocate is for the victim. I mean, religious leader, parent, boyfriend, girlfriend.
Absolutely.
Great.
We will take a referral from any source.
Okay, good. And you were talking a little bit about qualifying crimes for the visas, for the special visas. Can you tell me what the qualifying crimes are?
Sure. So the U visa has a list of about 23 crimes, so I'm going to have to read them because I can't remember them all. But to qualify for a U visa, the qualifying crimes are abduction, sexual assault, exploitation or abuse, blackmail, domestic violence, extortion, false imprisonment, hostage, incest, involuntary servitude, slavery, peonage, kidnapping, manslaughter or murder, obstruction of justice, human trafficking, torture, criminal restraint, witness tampering or perjury, felony assault, prostitution, rape, or other related crimes that maybe have similar elements to those that are specifically listed, can also potentially qualify for a U visa.
Okay. So are you saying that women or men are here under their spouse's visas, for example, but become a victim of like domestic violence from their spouse, could seek their own visa through being a victim of domestic violence, for an example? That's
right. They may be able to qualify for immigration relief because they've been a victim of a crime.
Okay. And if the person is completely undocumented and is a victim of either human trafficking, domestic violence, or any of the other crimes that you mentioned, is it safe to come forward to an agency like ours and seek assistance, or are they putting themselves at risk for harassment or deportation? Is it safe?
Well, it's hard to say that any activity by someone who's here completely undocumented is completely without risk.
Okay.
However, coming forward to an agency like ours is probably among the lowest risk activities that he or she could partake in.
Okay.
We are completely focused on serving those individuals who are in need and to qualifying victims of crimes. Where the risk, the inherent risk will always exist is with working with law enforcement. However, because these forms of immigration relief exist, even if a problem were to arise with one's immigration status, qualifying for a U visa, a T visa, relief under VAWA would, generally erase those problems for qualifying individuals.
Okay. Now, you talked about the U visa, but you also mentioned other types of visas. Can you tell us more about those?
Sure. So a T visa, the T visa was created under federal legislation. It was created for for victims of a severe form of human trafficking, and those victims who have suffered greatly and are willing to assist in law enforcement in the investigation and or prosecution of the acts of trafficking.
Can you tell me what is human trafficking? I know that if I Google it, there's quite a few definitions, and quite honestly, it's confusing.
It is confusing. It's still confusing for me. Human trafficking is modern-day slavery. In layman terms, it is forced or compelled work, compelled services, or sex, where the person performing the work is being forced or coerced, convinced to do so. Under federal law, it's defined as getting labor, getting a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act, where the commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or the person is under 18 years old and is a minor. And then labor trafficking is obtaining a person or the services of a person for labor through the use of, again, force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of something like involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, slavery, basically where you're working to pay off a debt, trading your services for money owed, things like that. I can give kind of an example that'll help clarify. For example, domestic servitude, an individual who is brought to the United States to work in someone's house. And so I'm going to bring someone across, let's say, the Mexican border. I'm going to pay a smuggler to bring that person here. I'm going to pay a sum of money, and then when that person gets here, I'm going to pay, I tell him or her, I'm going to pay you $100 a week to watch my children. And then once, let's say it's a woman, once she arrives, I tell her, you owe me the money I paid to get you here, and I decided that I'm not going to pay you $100 a week, I'm going to pay you something less, and deduct from your pay what you owe me. And you can't leave my house, you can't speak with anyone else, I'm actually not going to pay you anything at all, and when you ask to leave or to be paid, I threaten you with deportation, or I threaten you, your family, your life, the lives of your children. Basically, I'm compelling your work using, in the scenario that I just gave, force, using fraud, lying to you about what the work is going to be when you get here, and coercion as well, for the purposes of using your services without paying you, forcing you to pay off a debt, basically enslaving you.
Alicia, I know that in some countries, human trafficking is not illegal. And I also know that sometimes people are willing to put themselves at risk like this because they are getting an opportunity to have a better life, even though it is in slavery, even though it's, in our standards, it's not good enough, but to them it is a higher standard of living. Is this still considered human trafficking if that's the case? Like if let's say I came from a foreign country and it's not illegal for human trafficking, so I come to the United States, and if I didn't come here, I wasn't going to have a job and I would have absolutely no money, and here at least I have a place to live and something to eat, is that still considered human trafficking?
I mean, I think it would depend on the scenario. if you are performing work willingly and there's no element of force or fraud or coercion, but maybe they're just paying you a very low salary, you are the victim of labor exploitation for sure. But if there is any sort of force, if you're being threatened with deportation, being physically, emotionally abused, there may be elements there that make it human trafficking, absolutely.
Okay. And I know that we've been focusing a lot on immigrants or international human trafficking,
Mm-hmm.
but can it happen to U.S. citizens in the United States? I mean, what's the rules? Do you have to cross international borders? Do you have to cross state borders? I mean, who can be a victim?
Really, it can be anyone, foreign-born or domestic. A lot of people confuse trafficking with smuggling. I know that when I first started working in this field, I did.
Mm-hmm.
I thought to be a victim of human trafficking, you had to be trafficked into the United States. But that's not the case. Paying someone to bring you into the United States, crossing the border, being trafficked brought into the United States is smuggling. That's a crime against the integrity of our U.S. borders. To be a victim of human trafficking requires that compelled work, requires that other element of force, fraud, or coercion. There has to be that commercial aspect in order for smuggling to become something that's human trafficking. And you don't have to be foreign-born to be a victim. What we see a lot of, unfortunately, right now is domestic minor sex trafficking. Mm-hmm. So young girls, what some people call child prostitutes. However, if you are a minor, you are not a prostitute. You are prostituted. You're being sexually exploited mm-hmm. If you're being controlled by a pimp. And so domestic minor sex trafficking is human trafficking, and it's punishable under the same legislation that created the T visa and that makes human trafficking of foreign-born victims a crime.
Okay. So I could be living in Ohio, 13 years old, and still be a victim of human trafficking through sex exploitation.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, and going back, sorry, I got a little off topic there for the visas, but going back to the visa issues, can you talk to us a little bit about the VAWA relief?
Sure. So one commonly known way of getting a green card, getting legal status here is through marriage to a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident. And typically, in order to get a green card based on that marriage, you and your partner have to go in together, prove you have a valid, good faith marriage in order to get that kind of immigration benefit. And that can cause a lot of problems to women and to some extent men who are suffering physical or mental abuse at the hands of their U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident spouse. Because they're controlling their immigration status. And so, for example, a woman who's being physically abused by her U.S. citizen spouse may fear reporting the crime because she feels like her status lies solely in the hands of her husband, or feels she has no recourse because the only way she's going to be able to gain any kind of status is to continue being married to this abusive man. Well, the Violence Against Women Act, relief under VAWA, makes individuals eligible to self-petition for legal status here, for lawful permanent residency for themselves and for their children, if the individual was abused by a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident, and the victim is either the spouse, the abused spouse, the abused child, or witnessed a child who witnessed spousal abuse, or if you're a parent who has been abused by your U.S. citizen child.
Okay. And
I'm sorry. And so, continuing my train of thought, and so under VAWA, some of the power that immigration status control power is given back to the victim. he or she can self-petition. It doesn't have to be with that abusive individual. There still has to be a good faith marriage. The marriage couldn't have been entered into for fraudulent purposes, like only to get papers, to get a green card. But if it was a good faith marriage and the victim has suffered some kind of abuse, he or she can, on his or her own, petition for their own green card.
It's interesting that you mentioned giving power back to the victim, because I know a lot of abusers take away power, and that's one of the ways that they control their victims. So can you tell me, do you think from your experience that most victims find themselves to be victims?
No. A lot of times victims are hard to identify for us, for agencies who are out there trying to help victims of human trafficking and these types of crimes. And it's also hard to self-identify, particularly if the victim is coming from a country where perhaps the crime's it's not a crime. And so that makes it very difficult to recognize you're the victim of a crime when you don't know that it's necessarily a crime.
Sure.
And also if you've suffered really severe emotional abuse, you're under the exerted emotional control of your abuser, of your trafficker, breaking out of that situation is going to be difficult. Reaching out to someone, escaping, getting information or services is going to be extremely challenging, especially if you're foreign born, perhaps don't speak English, or in a strange country, maybe don't have a lot of trust in law enforcement agencies.
So can people just call you if they think maybe they know someone who's a victim, or if they think maybe they themselves can be a victim? Even if they just think maybe but they're not 100% sure, can they still reach out and call you?
Sure, absolutely. We take referrals all the time. We can assess the situation and see if there's something that we can do, and we can also refer individuals to other agencies who might be able to meet their needs if we can't. Even for an agency like ours, who is working with victims of human trafficking and related crimes, it takes us a while to figure out what's really going on and what the real information is, because there tends to be so much trauma that it can take a while to even talk about what the victim has suffered. Mm-hmm. And we want to do it in a way that's culturally sensitive and that also isn't going to do more harm and re-victimize someone who's already suffered greatly.
So if there's a victim out there, or if somebody wants more information, I know you're the International Institute of Connecticut, mm-hmm. but is it okay if somebody from like Georgia calls you? Will you be able to help them? We can definitely
try and refer them to local organizations that can best meet their needs. We can only directly serve current Connecticut residents, but we can provide referral services for sure. On our website, which is www.icon.org, IICONN.org, we have a lot of information. There's also the National Anti-Human Trafficking Resource Hotline, where someone could call if you're out of the state of Connecticut, and that hotline could connect you with a local organization that serves victims of human trafficking and related crimes. But particularly if you're in Connecticut and you're the victim, the foreign-born victim of a serious crime and are looking for assistance, you can absolutely contact us. We have information on the website. In our main office in Bridgeport, the number is 203-336-0141. We have staff that speaks a variety of languages, and our agency also has a particular department for interpreters and translators. So even if we don't have someone in our victim service department staff that speaks your language, we have an interpreter or a translator that would be able to assist us in doing what we can. We also provide, for some individuals, low cost and free legal representation in immigration matters only, but we can provide referrals to other pro bono and low-cost attorneys for legal matters outside of immigration.
Okay, like divorce or...
Sure, child support,
okay.
restraining orders, things like that.
Great. I will put all of the contact information on our Facebook, also underneath the YouTube video, and also I'll list the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Of course, you know, the MILLA Project. I think that concludes all of my questions. Is there anything else that you would like to say, or do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of information, and some of it can be really hard to understand. Mm-hmm. So if you have more questions for me, please contact Lara, and just know that if you are the victim of a crime, even if you are an undocumented immigrant, you deserve a little bit of justice. And so, you know, I'm happy to do what I can. Our agency is happy to do what we can for those Connecticut-based victims of certain crimes.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to also agree with Alicia that whether or not you're documented, you deserve a good life. You are entitled to a life of kindness and free of harm. So always, you know, feel free to contact me or contact Alicia and reach out, because there is help out there. So that concludes today's legal webcast. I'm actually headed to the Department of Homeland Security on Tuesday, March 27th, and I'm going to be talking with a special agent in charge regarding victim safety and their role of protecting victims who are victims of domestic violence and human trafficking. So I will keep you guys updated on that, and I hope that you have found this webcast helpful. So till next time.